Hello?
Yeah, maybe unmute.
Can you hear us now?
We're here.
Can all of you hear us? Will you raise your hands if you can hear us? Everybody. Okay, so we're going to start the meeting over because I don't think you heard the beginning of the meeting. To begin this meeting, when we all meet together, we have to first elect a chairperson to run the meeting. And that's according to PC Rule 15F, Joint, Leeward, and Windward Planning Commissions. Okay. The Leeward Planning Commission or the chairperson of the Windward Planning Commission is selected to run the meeting. And whoever the chairperson not selected as the chairperson for the joint meeting shall be the first vice chair of the joint meeting. So what we're going to do is call for a motion for a chairperson.
Move that Chair DeFranco serve as the chairperson for the joint Windward and Leeward meeting.
Second.
So we have a discussion now. There's a
Purpose for that is that Leeward is meeting in person, so I figured it'd be easier to run the meeting in person.
Is there any discussion? If there is a discussion, it's important that you raise your hand so we can call upon you. Okay, so no discussion. Then we're just by a show of hands, can we? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Right.
Okay, so moved. Any opposed? No. Okay, so motion carries affirmative aye. So I'm going to call this meeting to order then. The joint meeting of the Leeward and Windward Planning Commissions will now come to order. It's Thursday, April 20th, 2023. And the time is 9:40. The meeting is streamed live on YouTube. And again, I'm going to just recommend everybody, speak one person at a time and raise your hand so that you can be recognized to speak. I'd like to do some introductions now for the Leeward commissioners in the Kona Council chambers. We have myself, Barbara DeFranco. We have Vice Chair Saheva Knowles. Say hello. Commissioner Clement Kanuha III.
Aloha.
Commissioner Mahina Duarte, it will be here shortly, and Commissioner Mike Vitusic. Commissioner Mike Dela Cruz is excused today. Windward commissioners via Zoom. Your report to comply with the Sunshine Law. When your name is called, please state who else is in your location and if they have any interest in the matter before us today. So we have Chair Dennis Lin.
Good morning. I am currently in Hilo in my house, and I have my 5-year-old daughter who has no interest in this matter.
Good morning.
Good morning. Vice Chair Louis Danielle III. I said that right.
Yes, I'm currently in Ka'u in my office with no one with me.
Thank you. Commissioner Lauren Balog.
I'm currently in a conference room at my office in Waimea, and it's just me present.
Hi, good morning. Commissioner John Cross.
I'm in Hakalau, Hawaii with my bull mastiff and Labrador who cannot understand a word you are saying.
Okay, Commissioner Wayne DeLuz.
Good morning. I'm actually in Oahu, in my Oahu office. No one is present except myself.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chantel Perrin.
Aloha and good morning. I am in my home from Mountain View, and it's just myself and my 15-year-old daughter. She has no interest in what is going on right now.
Thank you. And I'm Barbara DeFranco chairing this meeting. We meet the quorum requirement to hold this joint meeting by having minimum of 8 members present. Windward commissioners, please be reminded to keep your camera on as the Sunshine Law requires at least a quorum to be visible at all times. Okay, and more introductions from the Office of Corporation Counsel in person. We have Deputy Corporation Counsel Sinclair Ferguson.
Good morning.
Thank you. And Deputy Corporation Counsel Jean Campbell. Morning. And representing the Planning Department in person, we have Director Zendo Kern.
Aloha.
And our staff in person, Planning Program Manager Maya Jackson.
Good morning.
Hi, Maya, and Planner Alex Roy. Hi, Alex, and Planner Tracy Lee Camaro.
Good morning.
Good morning. And Planner Clinton Mercado.
Aloha.
And our dear Leeward Secretary Narika Sauer. Okay, and then our staff via Zoom, we have Win-Win Secretary Melissa DeCannon Salvador.
Good morning.
Morning, and Janice Hata as our Zoom host. Wherever, Janice, you there?
Oh, hello. Good morning.
Okay. All right, just a little bit of background housekeeping to go over in-person attendees. Please make sure that your cell phones are turned off or on silent mode. And Zoom attendees, please silence your other devices. To everyone, please speak directly into your microphone and mute it while you're not speaking. Only one person may speak at a time. So raise your hand to be recognized by me before you start speaking. Leeward Commissioners, it's difficult for others on Zoom to see who is talking, so please identify yourself first when you speak. In-person audience, if there's anyone who would like to testify, please fill out the yellow sign up. I haven't received any yellow sign up cards, so I'm thinking there's no, okay. So we can see. All right, this is a remote meeting. So according to Sunshine Law, if our audio visual connection is lost, the meeting will automatically recess. And if the connection is not restored within 30 minutes and there is no quorum, the meeting will be terminated. Finally, we intend to conclude this meeting by noon since the Leeward Planning Commission has its regular meeting starting at 1. Okay, so public test we need to make. So there hasn't been any new statements being made that we need to look at. There's no one else speaking. Okay, so is there people speaking on Zoom? Is there anybody speaking at all?
Oh, this is Corey Harden. I'm waiting to testify when you're ready.
Okay. So just to make sure that we all speak kindly to each other, respectfully to each other, and that you have 3 minutes in which to speak. And in public testimony, either you can speak now or yeah, I guess it's speaking now because this is the agenda item, right? So, so we should take that first, right? So we want to take the public testimony first. So is that someone who is on Zoom then?
Do we have anybody in person?
Yeah. So
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is
Where are you in? So where's her name? Corey Harding. Corey Hardin. Hi. Can you
Hi.
raise your hand and say you're going to tell the truth today before the commissioners?
yes. Mhm.
Thank you. Can you again just state your name and where you're from?
Oh, okay. Corey Harden for Hilo. First, thank you all for your volunteer service on this commission. I'm sent email testimony. I'm sorry it was late. I did not get notice of this meeting, though I've been on the email list for years. I am in strong support of strengthening coastal zone management policy. And that said, I have a few comments. First, I wonder if the county has already been following requirements in Act 16 and changes before Act 16 made to HRS 205A. And if the county was not following requirements, were some county approvals done legally or not? Also on pages 12 to 13 of the document, Work on structures is called repair if it's 51% or less of the replacement cost of the structure. And I hope there is something to prevent people from spreading out multiple repairs over time to avoid going over the 51%, just doing things in bits and pieces. Page 14, there's there is a requirement for an archaeological inventory report pursuant to DLNR and SHPTA rules, and that has been deleted and is replaced with a written description and plot plan. I would support keeping the inventory report as a stronger tool to protect historic resources, and I think it's allowable for the county to have more stringent rules than the state. Looking at Rule 8, page 8.7, this says planning can waive a public hearing on a variance application. I hope the helicopter's not disturbing you. Our tour company is at work. Planning can waive a public hearing on a variance application if no one asks for a hearing. I don't support this. It's easy to miss a little legal notice buried in the back of the newspaper. And again, I didn't even get notice of this meeting. I'm at Rule 8, page 8.9. A variance can be granted if a proposal is related to private facilities or improvements that are clearly in the public interest. This seems awfully broad.
30 seconds remaining.
Like to see something like this come before the Planning Commission. Rule 11, page 11.4 at the bottom. There used to be language saying not in excess of 1 gallon per person per day when you're taking things off the beach. And the 1 gallon limit got deleted, but I wish it would be restored to protect our resources. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for our? No questions? All right, well then, thank you so much. And so now we've concluded public testimony. And we are on to new business. And this is the introduction of the agenda item. So the proposed amendments to the Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9, review and action of the proposed amendments to the County of Hawaii's Planning Commission's PC Rule 8 regarding shoreline setback and PC 9 regarding the Special Management Area, the SMA, to conform with Act 16, which amended Chapter 205A, Hawaii Revised Statutes, regarding the Special Management Area and shoreline setbacks. The proposed amendments to PC Rule 8 and 9 seek to add sea level rise to the definition of coastal hazards, adds a definition of beach to enhance beach protection, restricts construction of shoreline hardening structures at sites with beaches, increases the minimum shoreline setback from 20 feet to 40 feet, and includes the construction of a single-family residence on a shoreline parcel as development. So we're going to proceed now with the staff presentation. Oh. Tracy, are you ready for us?
Yes, I am. If we could just wait while staff gets the presentation up on the screen.
Janice, what do you see on the screen, please?
I see the presentation, but I also see the slides on the left side.
Okay, thanks. Now,
Looks good. Thank you.
Clinton, we can't see the presentation anymore. Oh, sorry. I see it's loading right now.
Sorry, what do you see now? Technical.
Sorry, I see the presentation, but I also see the slides on the left side. Okay, now I can see the presentation in full screen and I don't see the slides on the left.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair and members of the Windward and Leeward Planning Commission. I welcome you today to our joint Planning Commission meeting. Before you today, we have the review and action of the proposed amendments to Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9 regarding the special management area and shoreline setback area. Sorry, I just want to move this a little out of the way so it's not in our view. Okay. So again, like I mentioned before you today is the proposed amendments to the Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9, which includes changes made by Act 16, which amended Chapter 205A of the Hawaii Revised Statutes regarding the special management area and the shoreline setback area. The proposed amendments, just in a brief form, to the Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9 relating to Act 16 includes adding the definition of beach to enhance beach protections. It adds the definition of coastal hazards. It includes the construction of a single-family residence on a shoreline parcel as development. It restricts the construction of shoreline hardening structures at sites with beaches. And it clarifies when a public hearing for granting a shoreline setback variance can be waived. In addition to the Planning Commission rules that are being proposed or proposed amendments that are before you today, there are also proposed amendments to the Planning Department Rule number 11, which includes changes made by Act 16, which again amended Chapter 205A of the Hawaii Revised Statutes regarding the shoreline setback area. The proposed amendments to Department Rule 11 relating to Act 16 seek to add a definition of beach to enhance the beach protections. It adds the definition of coastal hazards. It clarifies when permitted structures may be repaired and maintained, but not rebuilt and replaced. It adds the definition of rebuild and repair, and it increases the minimum shoreline setback from 20 feet to 40 feet. So first, I'm going to start off with the proposed amendments to the Planning Commission Rule 8, Rule 9, and the Planning Department Rule 11, which resulted from the changes made by Act 16. The common occurrence within these three rules is that the definition of beach, which you can see on your screen, was added by Act 16. As defined by Act 16, the definition of beach means a coastal landform primarily composed of sand from eroded rock, coral, or shell material, or any combination thereof that is established and shaped by wave action and tidal processes. Beach includes sand deposits in near-shore submerged areas or sand dunes or upland beach deposits landward of the shoreline that provide benefits for public use and recreation, for coastal ecosystems, and as a natural buffer against coastal hazards. In addition to the definition of beach, Act 16 also provided a definition for coastal hazards. Coastal hazards means any tsunami, hurricane, wind, wave, storm surges, high tide, flooding, erosion, sea level rise, subsidence, or point and non-point source pollution. Prior to this provision, there was no definition of beach or coastal hazard within our rules as well as HRS. So before you today, I'm going to start off with the Planning Commission Rule 9 proposed amendments. Planning Commission Rule 9 is the Special Management Area Commission rule. So the proposed amendments to Planning Commission Rule 9 amended Chapter 205A-22 of the HRS by defining what development does not include. So according to HRS 205A-22, development does not include the construction and reconstruction of a single-family residence that is less than 7,500 square feet of floor area, is not situated on a shoreline parcel or a parcel that is impacted by waves, storm surges, high tide, or shoreline erosion, and is not a part of a larger development. This amendment was added to Rule 9-4, Section I-2A. And prior to this amendment, only single-family dwellings with 7,500 square feet or more in size were considered development and therefore required an estimate permit. With this amendment, all single-family dwellings located within a shoreline parcel or a parcel that is impacted by waves, storm surges, high tide, or shoreline erosion will not be exempt and will require an estimate permit in order to determine potential impacts to the shoreline area and other ocean resources. Next, I'm going to go over the Planning Commission Rule 8 proposed amendments. Rule 8 is the shoreline setback variance. I do want to point out before going over this slide for the waiver of the public hearing and action of the commission that the PC or the Planning Commission may delegate the authority to the department to waive a public hearing as said in Act 16 on page 264 within your exhibits in section 9. So this specific slide is going over the changes that Act 16 made to Rule 8-10, which is the waiver of public hearing and action of the commission within our rules. I want you to note that there are 4 situations where a shoreline setback variance can be waived, and we will review 2 of the situations in this slide as well as the next. This specific slide changed the definition of a protection of a structure and clarified if it could be an artificial structure. This also included the emergency authorization and gave a time period that shall not exceed 3 years, should an emergency authorization be granted. This is the second situation that I mentioned earlier, in which the waiver of a public hearing or action can be granted for a shoreline setback variance. As you can see in your background and rec, this provision is also made to be in order with conformance with changes made to Chapter 205A of HRS prior to Act 16. In addition to the 2 slides previous, the Planning Commission Rule 8-10 D and E waiver of the public hearing is also being proposed to be amended as followed on the screen. This again provision was made in order to be in conformance with the changes made to Chapter 205A of the HRS prior to Act 16. The proposed change that's being presented to you now is Rule 8-10, the criteria for approval of a variance. This specific section was taken directly from Act 16, which is currently in our Rule 8-11 criteria for approval of a variance. This is important because this restricts the construction of shoreline hardening structures at sites with beaches. In addition to the Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9 proposed amendments, the Planning Director is also proposing amendments to the Planning Department Rule 11 regarding to the shoreline setback in order to conform to Act 16. Please note that the changes do not require the approval by the Planning Commissions. However, the Planning Director has provided the Commission with the draft rules as these are proposed changes relating to Act 16 and they are pretty significant. One of the first changes that Act 16 has amended in Chapter 205A was the establishment of the shoreline setback lines. In Planning Department Rule 11-5, the setbacks along the shorelines are being proposed to be 40 feet inland from the shoreline. This provision was done to help shift new development away from exposure to coastal hazards. This amendment will no longer allow for counties to reduce the shoreline setback to less than 40 feet for existing shallow shoreline lots, where the buildable area of the parcel will be less than 50% of the parcel after applying the setback. Based on this amendment, HRS Section 11-5 is being proposed on the bottom, as you can see. In addition, the Planning Department Rule 11-7, the structures or activities permitted within the shoreline setback area is being proposed to be amended to match Act 16, which did include that permitted structures may be repaired but shall not be enlarged, rebuilt, or replaced within the shoreline area without a variance. This provision will prohibit the rebuilding or replacement of existing structures within an approved shoreline setback without an approved shoreline setback variance. Based on that amendment, HRS Section 11-7B of Department Rule was proposed to be as amended as followed on the bottom. Lastly, because the previous slide did have certain words in there that the Planning Department rules did not specifically address in our definitions, the Planning Director has proposed the two amendments before you today. And those two amendments include adding the definition of rebuild and repair. So rebuild would mean the reconstruction of a lawfully existing structure when the reconstruction is valued by a licensed professional engineer or architect at more than 50% of the replacement cost of the structure. And also repair, which would mean the fixing, renovation, improvement, or restoration of any part of the lawfully existing structure, but not the entire structure solely for the purpose of its maintenance and does not result in the addition to or the enlargement or expansion of the lawfully existing structure. Repair includes, but is not limited to, the alteration of floors, roofs, walls, or the supporting structure of a building, or the rearrangement of any of its component parts. Again, this provision will provide the definitions for repair, rebuild, and replace. And in order to effectively implement this section of HRS, these definitions are being added. These definitions are similar to other definitions used by other counties in the state of Hawaii. So before you today, the Planning Director is recommending that the Joint Planning Commission approve the proposed Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9 amendments. And just as an FYI, the next steps include, so for the Planning Commission Rule 8 and 9, should the Commission adopt the rules as recommended by the Planning Director, the rules can be transmitted to the Mayor for review. Once the Mayor has signed the rules will be filed with the County Clerk's Office, and the rules will then become effective 10 days after they are filed with the County Clerk's Office. The Commission can also make motions to amend the rules in specific sections as they please. For the Planning Department Rule 11, the Planning Director will incorporate the feedback from the Planning Commissions. The Planning Director will hold a community meeting to present Rule 11 and get public feedback. Once a final draft of Rule 11 is completed, Rule 11 will then be transmitted to the Mayor's office for review. Once the Mayor has signed the rules will be filed with the County Clerk's Office, and the rules will again be effective 10 days after they are filed with the County Clerk's Office. So that concludes my presentation, and I can turn it back to Chair DeFranco.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm going to just ask the commissioners, can we put them back up so we can see them. If they have any questions for the staff, and this isn't, we're gonna hold off on discussion until we have our motion made, but these are for direct questions that you may have to clarify, or you. So, is there? Yes.
Uh,
And,
Chair DeFranco,
sorry.
question for either Tracy or the planning director regarding that one provision where there doesn't need to be a hearing or notice. I have a little bit of concern just based off of, what if a neighbor is doing something and they don't notify anybody and it does have an impact to their neighboring property? And there's no hearing or any notice to anybody else in the area. Just if you could comment on that. I forget which slide it was. I'm sorry, Tracy. I believe it was towards the beginning or maybe the middle.
Hi, Vice Chair Lynn, this is Maya Jackson. I can go ahead and respond to that. So the waiver of a public hearing for issuance of a shoreline setback variance provision in state law, it does actually require that the department send notice to surrounding property owners as well as a public notice. And so that provision still stays. The only difference is that for those 4 types of activities or uses, the director can make the decision should the commission choose to delegate that authority to the director. And if they do, the hearing is waived, but the director still has to make like a findings decision and findings, and the decision has to be based on the same criteria that the planning commissions use for issuing a shoreline setback variance. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Maya.
Chair DeFranco,
Yes, Commissioner Knowles.
Maya, along those lines, can you speak to one of the concerns that was raised about the public notice requirement in the newspapers, and sort of has the county considered, that fewer people receive newspapers or have access to them? I'm just thinking about that public notice requirement and if we've thought about evolving it at all.
So currently, our planning commission rules require public notice in the newspaper for all of the applications that go before the commission. And that would include a shoreline setback variance that is issued by the director, where the public hearing is waived. So unless the planning commission rules are amended to take that out, which they're not being amended to take that out now, that would not change.
Thank you.
Commissioners, any other questions for the staff?
Chair DeFranco, I have.
Wait, excuse me, Commissioner
I'm just
Vacuzek.
curious,
Go ahead.
what would be the appropriate time to bring up some potential administrative changes in the rules? That would be now or after a motion's been made.
I think it's gonna be after the motion is made. Any other direct questions for the staff?
I had one, Chair DeFranco.
Vice
I
Chair?
might be getting into the weeds, but what is the definition for the planning department of shallow? Because that is referenced in that one slide. You define rebuild and you define the other terms, but what is the definition of shallow?
Give us just a moment to get that slide up. Clinton, can you go back to that slide? I think it's the third to the last. Can you see that, Chair Lynn, Vice Chair Lynn?
Yes. I think it was one slide before that. It talked about the properties with or shorelines where have shallow
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So prior to Act 16, the minimum shoreline setback was 20 feet statewide. And the county applied a 40-foot setback. However, we did allow exceptions to that based on the lot depth. So what Act 16 did is they took away the ability for the county to have that exception. And now any lot along the shoreline has a minimum 40-foot setback, regardless of their lot depth.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner DeWart.
Yes, for Commission Rule number 9, the proposed amendments, when you're using the term adverse environmental or ecological effect, and trying to minimize adverse effect, can you help me understand how that is measured and quantified? It says here, minimize the extent practical is clearly outweighed by public health, safety, or compelling public interests. Shall include but not limited to potential cumulative impact of individual developments and so forth. So how is the cumulative effect of individual developments measured and quantified?
Can you point to where you're speaking to in the rule?
It's Commission Rule number 9. I'm sorry, I'm looking at the packet, not the slides. It's in our packet, background and recommendations. It's on page number 5.
9-5? Did you say 9-5?
Page number 5. Page number 5.
And you're on number 7, is that correct? On page 5, number 7?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Where am I?
Yes.
Okay. I'm sorry, can you repeat your question
Yes.
now that I'm looking at it?
So in determining cumulative impact, right, effect or impact, help me understand how are we measuring cumulative impact of individual developments? How do we measure that? How do we quantify it? How do we determine whether there's adverse impact or not?
So I think we attempted to answer that at the last meeting of the Leeward Planning Commission. We generally use the guidance document for assessing cumulative impacts that was provided by the Office of Planning and Sustainable Development. And they have a checklist that they go through. Basically, you look at temporal effects and spatial effects. And based on the resource, and you go through and identify what the resource is and what the temporal and spatial effects of the activity or development would be on that resource.
So as a follow-up question, are we required, can we create additional tools to understand adverse impact, or are we required to only be guided by those state level rules?
We absolutely have the
definitions.
ability to create our own tools. This information that was provided by OPSD is just a guideline.
General,
Yes.
broad direction.
Yes.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other questions for?
Yes, Chair.
Oh, yes, Commissioner Batuzzi.
Couple of questions. Is there any exemption in the rules for like Kuleana use or cultural use of sites for habitation.
Not specifically at this time.
Mhm.
I know there was a bill at the state legislature, and I think it's still active, that addresses that. So if those changes are adopted, then we can incorporate that into the next round of rule changes.
Next is on page 14. It's the 9-13 archaeological material. And I'm just curious how you see that working with the timelines for submittal to planning department or to planning commission and the timeline for the historic preservation review process.
That has always been a challenge, aligning those two processes, because they both have statutory deadlines to follow. So this change was made because I want to say about 4 years ago, the county met with SHPD, and SHPD said, we are no longer doing review when requested by applicants. Based on HAR, they wanted to do an agency to agency review, meaning the county initiates the HAR process. So due to that, we removed this section in our applications, and we're proposing to remove it now from our rule, where the applicant would initiate that process by writing a letter to SHPD and saying, hey, I don't have any resources on my property. Can I get a letter of no historic effect? And so what this does is it just changes it so that the county initiates that process once we receive an application. So as you mentioned, the downside of that can be that the applicant doesn't think they have any resources on their property. So in their application, they say, I'm not aware of any resources. Then we send it to SHPD for review, and SHPD says, no, we think there may be resources, so we want an AIS done. At that point in time, we typically work with the applicant and say, we could move this forward to Planning Commission, but we wouldn't necessarily be able to provide a favorable recommendation because we don't have the information we really need to assess the historic and cultural impact. Typically, when that happens, that landowner understands that, and they proceed to do the AIS, and it puts the application on hold so that that process can be completed before coming to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it just feels like that has the potential of making the process longer and more difficult. If the application is submitted and then they have to go to basically square one of assessing impacts on historic properties. I feel like if an application comes in, it should have enough information contained within that application to assess the effect of that project on historic sites. So to me, again, SHPD's rules haven't changed. The way that they were implemented by SHPD through their HICRIS system, that changed, but their administrative rules, HAR 13-284, haven't changed. They're exactly the same. So to me, I think the language needs to.
So Mike, I think that, when we get the motion on the table,
Sure.
then maybe we can discuss that a little further and put it out there.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, Commissioner.
I had
Knowles.
one further question.
It's a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Promise, has a question mark at the end.
Oh, turn your mic on though, to just. there you go.
I just wanted to go, circling back to 8-10, the waiver provision. And the amendment, specifically looking at 8-10, 3A3. Can you speak to this kind of broad language that gives the department the power to waive a public hearing or action for other structures and activities, provided that no person or agency has requested a public hearing within 25 calendar days after public notice of the application. It seems very broad. And
Again, I
it-
think,
Well-
are you asking a question?
I'm asking a question. Why that provision is kind of a catch-all? Is that how you're looking at it? Can you?
Yes, I agree. It is very broad.
Great.
But it was
Context.
actually already part of HRS prior to the Act 16 change. I think some counties have included this in their planning commission rules and some have not. And the way HRS reads, each county can decide whether or not they want to delegate that authority to the director. If you disagreed with that provision, then if somebody proposed other structures and activities, then that shoreline setback variance would come to the planning commission for a decision.
Got it. We can take this to the next phase. Thank you so much, Maya.
And I'd also like to add that even though this provision is in law, I've worked here 15 something years and I've seen it used very, very rarely. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 times in 15 years. So that's not to say that it won't be used more frequently in the future since sea level rise and erosion's occurring, but the past track record is that it's not utilized very often.
Thank you.
So if we don't have any more questions, then, and we don't have any comments on Zoom. Oh, so, sorry, is anybody on the Windward Planning Commission, do you have any questions for the staff before we move on? There's no public testimony. So then if we can get a motion for action so that we can actually discuss this, I think it's an appropriate time to do this. So I'm looking for a motion, please.
I
Commissioner
move that
Knowles,
we,
a motion, yes.
yes, sorry, I don't have the language in front of me, but I move that we
Affirmative or negative.
affirm and enter the discussion. I move to accept the proposed changes that the planning department has presented to us today for rules 8, 9.
Thank you. We have a
Second.
Commissioner Pajan Duarte. Okay, so now we have a motion on the floor. So now we are open to discuss and look at this and pull it apart and ask the questions amongst each other and talk about how this is going to affect everybody. So please raise your hands if you want to make your comment. I know, Mike, I cut you off there. Do you want to start off? Okay.
Sure, okay. Going back to the 913. So under HAR 13-284, it is the county's responsibility to identify any historic properties that are present in the project area and to conduct the historic preservation review processes 6 steps, right? Identification, evaluation, mitigation, and confirmation mitigation. In order to do that, I think the county would need to receive more information upfront as part of the application. My recommendation would be that the application include some sort of assessment prepared by a qualified archaeologist that identifies the potential for historic properties and provides a determination of effect that the agency can then agree with or not agree with and submit that to SHPD for concurrence. I think that the information that's there currently in the language is adequate. it does put responsibility on the applicant, but SHPD's rules 13284 allows for the agency to delegate responsibilities of the process to an applicant. So there can be a formal delegation from the agency to the applicant to conduct the historic preservation review process items, which would allow the applicant to then prepare a AIS in advance of the application and get all that stuff figured out before it comes to commission.
And that would shorten the process.
I think so, because I think as it as it currently is, as is proposed, I'm sorry, as is being proposed, all the information that we would have is a plot map and information on any known historic sites and cultural properties, which, as we've all known, is insufficient in determining whether there are actually historic or cultural properties in the area. So that application comes in with that limited information that has to go to SHPD, and we'd be relying on them to turn that around within 30 days. And I don't know how that works with our timeline, but to me, it's not going to create a effective process. I think the county needs to have the authority, as it is granted under 13284, to make its own decisions about impacts on historic sites. So you need to have that information up front.
I agree, Commissioner Matusek. And I think it actually it's also very helpful because it sets it up front that this is a priority for the county and requires people to kind of go through the steps early on rather than go back and forth.
Right.
So, okay, so,
Question?
well, I was just asking for some clarification because if we want to pursue this and to incorporate this language or make it a change here, I think we have to we can't really actually do it here. We can either affirm or negate what we want to go forward. And if we want to change something with an amendment to what they're asking, then we have to give the public 30 days notice. Is this, am I hearing this right?
Yeah, so Deputy Corporation Counsel Sinclair Salas Ferguson here. So today, the public has been provided notice of the changes to the rules as they're written here today. So the commission can make a decision today to accept or reject. But if the board members suggest a significant change to a rule that wasn't provided in the notice, then we'd have to give the public 30 days notice. So what the commission can do today is, say, for example, you want to accept the majority of the changes, but there's a certain changes that you don't want to accept. You can reject that and then suggest changes to the planning department, and then they would issue those changes, and then the public would have the opportunity to comment on it, and then we could come back at a further time.
But, okay.
So essentially, as Mike Matusek, so essentially all we can do is either accept or not accept the language that's been proposed.
Well,
Yeah,
we can recommend what you're saying, be
Yeah.
put in it.
But for today to adopt these, we can either adopt what is
Right.
written, or we can make non-substantive changes.
Correct, yeah. So if we make a change to the rule that's substantive, that the
Yeah.
public would have wanted the opportunity to comment on that, then we got to give them 30 days notice. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, I would make a secondary motion that the change to, was it? Let me find the exact language. Rule 9-11B or be removed.
Okay. So we're going to note this, and because there may be other changes that are going to come up now as we're having a discussion, is that right? Action should be taken on each motion, okay. So we need a second for that? Commissioner Knowles, are you seconding that?
My second.
Okay, And now do we need to vote?
Discussion.
Discussion. So now we're going to discuss the removal of this language from the amendment, the proposed amendments.
Chair DeFranco, this
Vice
is
Chair Lynn.
Vice Chair Lynn. I'm on the same thought process of Commissioner Vitusik, but I guess I wanted to get more clarification on, how it's written is that the planning department initiates the process with SHPD, right? Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep, it's the agency is the language.
Right.
In, administrative.
So I guess from when the applicant provides the plot map and the information to the planning department, what actions does the planning department then make to initiate the process? That would be my question.
What initiates the process for the planning department is the filing of an application.
Okay, and so then what other steps go on from planning department then to the submittal to SHPD?
Once the application is accepted, the staff planner submits it to SHPD through their HiCRIS system. And then they
Okay.
have a certain period of time to review the application and what's submitted to decide whether there is no effect or an AIS is required.
Okay, so there's not really like a due diligence phase that the planning department would go through to just kind of check the property to see if we know of any archaeological or historical aspects?
Yes, so in addition to the information received in the application, when the staff planner submits through HiCRIS, we are supposed to provide SHPD any records we have within the department that show that there are historic or cultural resources on the property. That way, SHPD has not only the applicant's information, but the department's information as well.
Okay, thank you for the clarity.
Commissioner Parsha-Devart.
My question is to Commissioner Vitusik. Can you please restate the motion you made?
Sure. My motion is that we don't make this change that's being proposed. That the language be kept as is for now until we can revise it to make it more adequate for considering the effect of the project on historic properties. So,
Okay, so we can talk about the proposed language right now.
okay. Yeah, to me, I think that would be most helpful is if the department is receiving an assessment from a qualified archaeologist that's able to look at it, do their own review of it, and say, there are no historic properties on this parcel. We've checked it out. We looked at the records, all that, and they have a archaeological license that they can stamp on it. And then the department doesn't need to have that expertise internally. They can review the qualified perspective, and then they can say they check it against their records, agree, and send that over to the state. If the qualified archaeologist says, hey, there are sites here, you guys got to do a full-on AIS, then you'll have that information up front, and we'll all be able to really assess the effect of the project on historic sites.
I'd like to comment. So I wholeheartedly agree with the thought process behind this. I think I believe that it could be mutual, it could be beneficial for all parties involved. My question is to staff, what might be some of the reasons or challenges that need to be overcome to implement a recommendation like this?
So I think one of the more confusing mentions in this specific section that I've had trouble with applicants that come before me is the request for the copy of the letter written by the applicant to the DLNR SHPD requesting a no effect. In the past, I've had members of the public tell me that SHPD doesn't want to hear from them. Those were kind of their words, that they would rather hear from the department. And a lot of the time, some of these applicants are really laymans. It's their first time they're applying for this type of application. And so I understand where Commissioner Vitusik is coming from. There are certain sections in there that are still confusing for the laymans. So I'm not too sure.
Sure. For that particular example, if we're just strictly going off of the administrative rules, it'd be HAR 13-284C1. The agency has responsibility for initiating the historic preservation review process. The agency may have others prepare the review process items. So under the rules, the agency can formally delegate to the applicant to conduct the review process, to prepare the archaeological assessment, to prepare the request for a letter of no effect. That's in the rules. And so it's one of those things where they have to follow their rules. And county would totally be okay in delegating that to somebody. So as it is currently written, it does match with the rules as are currently written. It would just require more, I guess, standard operating procedures from the county on how that delegation, the notice of delegation of authority under 6E is given to the applicant.
Director Kern.
Yeah, just a clarification, Zendo Kern, your planning director. So essentially what you're saying is that every application be required to hire an archaeologist.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, that is a tough one. I don't know if that's what's appropriate, but you need to have an assessment of historic properties in order to meet the minimum requirements of the SMA, right? Sure. Who does that? If the county has the staff to do it, that's ideal. If the county doesn't have the staff to do that, then the county needs to have the applicant hire somebody to do that.
So in most cases, when an application is being thought about or processed, the county staff tells the person, hey, this is an area along the coast. You're being in your best interest to conduct an archaeological, survey or at least a recon. Not everybody listens to that. Not everybody has that preliminary conversation around it. And so then when the application is submitted, that's when it's put into the HICRIS system. Shifty looks at it and then comes back and says that is an area that we need it or not. But we're just trying to get clarity. So what you're saying is any application would then require the hiring of an archaeologist, whether it was a small one or whether it was a large one, to make that initial review, not necessarily resulting in an AIS right off the bat, but in some type of archaeological survey or a recon. And in that case, where would there be an exemption? Or would there be?
See, and
one question, Zendo, with you saying that, what if there's an archaeological report on the property, but it's a new application that's coming through? Are you having to refile? And that's a quick, there's been a bunch of instances where there's stuff that's done in the 80s, but there's new stuff that's found now that's updated for a bunch of projects here on the coast, not only on the coast, but anything in that setback below Kuakini. And I would say, and call upon us. So that's a question that is qualified.
Sure. My theory on that again is I feel like it should be something that the county is able to assess. If they have staff to do that, they should be able to take into account the effect of the project on historic sites. That would fit into the Hawaii administrative rules where there is provision saying determining whether an adequate archaeological inventory exists. Right, that's one of the steps in the process. And so if an adequate archaeological inventory survey is found to exist, you skip ahead to the next phase of the process.
Yeah, that was my question,
Yeah.
I know there's been a bunch that's been there, and I know there's been certain things that have come up before that require a new ARC survey with anything on a new application, even if there's something that was previously done in the 90s, 80s, or even early 2000s.
Yeah, so even if it's not a requirement to be submitted by an archaeologist, but if we have the criteria that needs to be submitted in order to be considered, then, if it's a qualified archaeologist submitting that, the county is more likely to agree with it versus requiring them to go back to SHPD and go through the process sequentially. And
So essentially, it streamlines the process. potentially.
Potentially.
And takes the onus off of the planning department to sort of track.
So the thing there is, we've often gotten
sorry.
hung up where planning department has received an application or something, and it goes to SHPD for review, and they're unable to complete the review in the statutory time period, but the planning department's unable to move forward because they don't have the internal expertise to make a determination on a historic property. And if there's a process, and I don't know exactly what that would be, right? Where someone can submit a letter of determination from a qualified archaeologist that the planning department can then use to forward to SHPD, request the determination. And if SHPD doesn't meet their statutory deadline, then the planning department can move forward with the application in the statutory time period and having considered the effect of historic properties. I mean, that's what the rules say. So we just need to have that process where we can do that. And
That
I don't
makes a
know
lot
what
of
that is. We're a volunteer board that looked at this for a few hours yesterday.
Yeah, so I would say just thinking out loud,
Yeah.
thinking out loud here, right?
Yeah.
In order to effectuate that, you'd either have to have a licensed archaeologist submit do a recon, or the department would have to have a licensed archaeologist on staff to be able to make that professional review. Right? I mean, we're kind of one or the other, because if we're not professionals in that, it's hard to make that full determination.
Yeah, it's hard to be, I mean, yes, it's hard to make that determination without that expertise. I think you could. I mean, and technically it's the agency official, I mean, with all federal projects, it's the agency official who's responsible for making the determination. The professional archaeologists, whoever they may be, they're recommending to the agency official.
Sure. And when a licensed archaeologist makes a recommendation, it's a lot easier for the agency official to say, yes, we concur with that.
100%, 100%. And that's what I'm suggesting as an avenue to explore with the planning department is to have an avenue where a professional archaeologist can make a recommendation as a part of this that the agency can agree with or not agree with, and then pass that on to SHPD, and then use that determination to move forward when they miss their deadline.
So are you proposing that across the board? Because then, so just thinking out loud here, if that's proposed across the board, then everybody is required to hire a licensed archaeologist.
And as you said, I don't know that it has to be across the board. It's just us brainstorming here, right? But if that's another line item where someone may submit that along with their application, that
And
could
that
help them.
happens, like I say,
Yeah.
and that we do that, where we say, hey, you're coming in that area. We know that there's a high likelihood. It's in your best interest to prepare the recon or just do a full blown AIS and submit that with your package.
Yep.
And then we've also seen other cases where they don't do it, and then we get caught up in the process. Or, for example, we've seen the case where it's come here and you've requested to say, hey, I want to see something more, right?
Yeah.
We saw that recently in Coloco.
And just like how the rules currently written, there's multiple types of submittal that satisfy the archaeological requirement. So if this is just one of them, right, what the current language states is you need a map and any known historic sites. That basically puts you at a point where you're at the bottom of the historic preservation review process, and you have to claw your way through all of that without a lot of support from the department because they don't have any information on it. But if there's another line item that allows you to submit a more complete assessment, right? In the federal review process, section 106, which Hawaii Administrative Rules is patterned after, you receive a letter that identifies the historic properties in the area, describes any, assesses them for their significance, and then describes any needed mitigation. So you're at the end of the letter, you're just basically saying, yes, you agree, or no, you don't agree. And if the county is receiving those types of assessments prior to this, it would make it a lot easier for the county to make a adequate determination of effect. I mean, to me, it's like, we basically do the same thing that we did with Act 16. But you compare it instead to 13,284, and you see how that process works together, where you take what's existing in 284 and then put that into the language for archaeological assessment under 9-11 or whatever it is.
Yeah. And thank you, Mike. I'm just going to include our Windward commissioners. Do you have any comments on this motion?
Yeah, this is Vice Chair Lynn. I like the discussion we're having. I just, I would feel for the applicant in terms of, they submitted an application and they find out that they need to do a AIS. It's a significant cost burden to the applicant and in terms of money and time. So I like the discussion, but is there something we can do to kind of set just like like you said, the exemptions or the minimum requirements of what is needed, so that people know upfront if they have even an inkling when they apply that there might be, what are they going to ask their archaeologists to submit?
The category could be the SMA major versus minor.
Director Kern?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple elements here. We're bound by HRS and the SHPE rules, right? Regardless. And then we're looking at a process question, right? And one of the processes is how do we not streamline, but make the process efficient, right? So you get the archaeological conversation started early. And so I'm wondering within this combo, if there's not we have to follow the rules, guarantee. And then is there language as instructions or suggestions that say this is in your best interest, or you should really do this in these areas? And if you don't, it's kind of like pause, time out, you might have to redo it. So where we find, because there's nothing that's going to exempt us from following SHPE rules. I don't think there's anybody here that would want to exempt that, right? I think we all really value the cultural resources here. It's the process that we're talking about, right? And how do we make it efficient, articulate what they should do, or are we demanding that they have to? And that's kind of, I think, what Vice Chair Lynn was bringing up, like, how are they going to kind of figure that out? And I think that's right. That's kind of what we're trying to massage.
And part of the reason, like Tracy was saying, part of the reason that this was initiated is because some people are getting a negative from SHPE when they're trying to get this letter of determination, right?
So it changed, actually. So I was one of those people many years ago. So before, when you would start an application, if you were the one doing the application or you're the consultant, one of the first things you would do is write a letter to SHPE saying, I'm requesting a no effect determination for this property. And if you got the letter back, you could provide that in your application, as this language suggests. If they came back and said, no, we believe there's archaeological resources in this area, go ahead and do the work.
And then if they didn't come back in a certain time period, it defaulted or something.
The department would hold.
Would hold it.
Yeah, it
Okay.
wouldn't default. So then you go ahead and bulldoze. It doesn't happen.
Okay.
So then SHPE called one day after sending a number of letters, and they said, do not send us another letter. This process has stopped. Stop sending us letters. You need to go through the agency, you need to go through the department, and they're the ones who communicate with us. And that's what this language is correcting, is the State Historic Preservation Department request that it goes through the agency. And then what we're trying to do here with Commissioner Batusik is find the efficiency and the effectiveness on the
Right.
process and
So we're trying
timing.
to
Correct?
strengthen the process so that that everything is protected, right?
So what I want to try to avoid is the appearance that things are not being protected. The processes are being followed. I would say in some cases, it's not efficient.
Okay. So efficiency.
Yeah, but it's not that if they don't respond or don't respond, it's like, okay, go ahead and just bulldoze it. It's like, no, we want a response, or you could hire an archaeologist. Like we really do make sure that that's taken care of.
Okay. So we're just coming up with some extra language in here to make sure that the process is efficiently being done for the applicant and for the land and for the county.
And again, I think that, we could go on forever on this, but
Yeah.
I think that the recommendation that I have is that we leave that language in place for now because it is in line with administrative rules and it doesn't really change
So
it.
it would be in an affirmative place still if we leave it the way it is and.
I wouldn't amend the language as is being proposed.
Okay,
My motion was that we do not amend that particular section
okay,
of it.
all right. Is there any further discussion on this point or can we bring up some other? Oh, that was a motion that we need to vote on. All right. Is there any further discussion before we vote on this motion?
Sorry, I have this, a point I'd like to read. So my question to you is Commissioner Vitusek, so if the motion is that we do not revise or amend what's being proposed here, what's your ideas as to how will we move forward or advance some of your recommendations that we've just discussed?
I think that would be more up to the planning department on how they would consider that and compare it to the HARs and come back with revised language.
I'm hearing the same thing.
So should we repeat the motion and then vote on it? Is that where we are? Is there any more discussion on this? If, good.
Sorry, so okay, so we raised the thoughts and the questions. So my questions is to Director Kern. Would you favor moving forward, thinking through possible revisions as we, for future conversation?
Yeah, this section does need to be cleaned up regardless. So if this motion is to be approved, we'll go back and we'll look at it, taking the discussion that's being had today and looking at how we can improve that process. And then, like I'm trying to say, find that balance on the requirement versus the communication upfront and early. So everybody's very clear on it. And again, maintaining that we are very responsible for our archaeological resources as we have been. So, yeah.
So I'd like to call a 5-minute recess before we go further. Is that okay? Okay, all right. 5-minute recess. pull up our other half there. Hi, we're gonna call the meeting back to order. Everybody here, only one person missing. Okay, Maya's here. Okay, we're about ready to go. We're a person short there on. There you are. Okay, all right, everybody I think is here now. All right, and Maya first, no. Director Kurtz. Or Maya.
Chair DeFranco, can I just remind all of the Leeward Planning Commissioners to identify yourself before speaking so that the Windward Commissioners know who's speaking? Because they're just seeing the
Oh, they can't
general
see
image
us.
rather than everyone's
Okay.
faces. Thank you.
Thank you.
And in order, and also saying your name, you got to do the wave as well. Thank you, Chair.
Director Kern.
Thank you. If it's agreeable to the commission, our suggestion will be to have discussion around each one of the elements that there's discussion. And then to move to postpone the entirety of the rule application. So then we can take it back, make the adjustments, go back out for the public comment, and then bring it back to the commission, the joint commission as a whole package instead of breaking these out. So similar result at the end, but keeping it whole instead of fractioned. If so, that's our request. Thank you.
Sure. Would you,
Commissioner Vatusek.
this Commissioner Vatusek, would you like me to withdraw the motion to amend?
If the commission is agreeable to our request, that would be the next step to withdraw. Then we'll take the notes and then move on to the next topic.
Okay. I will withdraw the previous motion to amend.
We need a second.
Second.
Okay, and then do we discuss this or we're done? Oh,
So now we're on the main motion discussing any.
okay. So now the motion has been withdrawn. So now we go back to the main motion to see if there's any other points that the commissioners would like to comment or discuss. And Commissioner Vatusek.
Sure. Commissioner Vatusek, I'll just finish up my last things and then I'll try to be quiet the rest of the time.
I don't believe.
Page 4, I think there's a typo on our PDF. I don't know if that is incorporated into the language, but let's see.
Where is it?
The PDF that we got for the background report. Where was it?
Is
Yeah.
this the high tide word?
No, that's number 2. It says coastal hazard means Amy tsunami.
My apologies. I did catch that when I was doing the PowerPoint presentation. However, if I'm not mistaken, within the rule itself, that was
Okay.
actually correct. And I
Okay.
don't know where Amy came from. It's supposed to be any.
Cool. And then pages 9 and 11. There's a reference to sand beaches. Let's see. Yeah, yep.
To be
Yep.
sandy beaches.
So sand beaches, I would replace sand beaches with capital B beaches. So it's under the defined term of beaches. Right, because we're adding a definition of beaches, which includes sand beaches. And so I think having the capital B beaches as the defined term. Right,
Thank you.
okay, that's it for me.
Okay. Again, open, yes, Commissioner Knowles.
Commissioner Knowles, thank you, Chair DeFranco. I wanted to pick up the query about 810A3, which addresses the waiver of public hearing and action. Specifically, 810A3 states other structures or activities provided that no person or agency has requested a public hearing within 25 calendar days after public notice of the application. I'd like to see this taken out. It seems to me that this provision of 810A gives the commission, allows the commission to delegate to the department the authority to waive the public hearings for these instances where it seems sort of exigent circumstances, stabilization of the shoreline, protection of a structure that's at risk, and maintenance, repair, and reconstruction, and that this other structures or activities is a little bit too broad and maybe doesn't belong in this section because it's so sort of general.
Does someone
I'm
from the
open
county
to
wanna
feedback on that one.
comment on that too?
This particular section was just added, just to make a comment, this particular section was added due to the changes in HRS that added this section. And when we matched up our rules, we just took it as a concurrency to match the two and keep the two together. As far as for the, you're speaking about the other structures or activities, provided that no person or agency has requested a public hearing within 25 calendar days after public notice, correct?
That's correct. Yes. I mean, it just seems very broad to me, and I just wonder what the purpose of it is. So that the planning department can waive a public hearing kind of generally based on their own discretion under this provision?
Yes, that is correct. And I was just, me and Maya had talked about this prior to this meeting, that you guys do actually have the authority to take away that delegation under the commission.
Speak to this real quick.
Yes, excuse me.
Deputy Corporation Counsel Sinclair Salas Ferguson for the commission. So if everyone can take a look at their packet, it's 8-6 is the page number. It's section 8-10. And I think for me, it's easier to look at the amendments to the actual rules. So 8-10 waiver of public hearing and action states subsection A, the commission hereby delegates to the department the authority to waive a public hearing and to take action on a variance application for certain situations. The first one, stabilization of shoreline erosion by moving sand, protection of a structure determined by the department, etc. And then 3 and 4. So there's 4 situations. So the Hawaii Revised Statutes grants the commission the authority to delegate these powers to the department. So as the rules are currently written, the commission in the previous iteration of the rules that are currently in effect right now delegates to the department the authority to waive a public hearing if subsection 1 is satisfied, subsection 2 is satisfied, or subsection 4 is satisfied. And the department is proposing an amendment to subsection 3, which is based off of an amendment to the Hawaii Revised Statutes. But the department is also suggesting that the commission delegate its authority to grant the variance for other structures or activities under subsection 3. So that is for the commission to decide whether or not they want to delegate that authority under subsection 3, other structures and activities, to the department. So that's something the commission has to decide.
And I guess I'm saying I'm hesitant to delegate that authority for this broad catch-all. I see the necessity of it in these other areas because it seems like there's exigent circumstances, or something that we don't want to be happening is happening. But in this case, it's sort of just like, and then anything else. So I'm proposing that we do not add this amendment.
Do we have any other commissioners that want to comment on this? Yes. Baylock, Commissioner Baylock.
Hi, I agree with the vice or the chair. on this. I don't think we should delegate this to the department.
Thank you.
Madam Chair. Madam, I'm asking for the microphone just for a quick second. So because we're not going to be going through each section and say amending it here and doing a vote, I do think it would be helpful to kind of get a pulse from the general commission on how they're feeling about some of these suggestions that are being made. So that way we can kind of know, okay, the direction's moving in one way or the other, right? Because if one commissioner's, no offense, right? But if one commissioner says it, the rest of the commission's like, no, we really didn't agree with it. And we go ahead and take the time to make the amendment on it, then we're not really doing a service. So I think that would be helpful, is just to kind of get a general pulse. Like, most folks agree in that direction, great. Most folks don't, then you know what I mean? We can.
I think that's excellent.
Thank
We're open for discussion now, so let's take these moments to. Oops. No, no. Yeah, that we want to hear what everybody, how they feel. So this, Commissioner.
Commissioner Paishan Duarte here. In support of Commissioner Knowles's thoughts and recommendation.
Do we have anybody from the Windward Planning Commission? Yes. Vice Chair.
Vice Chair Lynn, I guess for Sinclair, the clarification that you were trying to make was that Hawaii revised statute currently states that we have the power to delegate, right? Not necessarily waive all this, but we have the power to delegate to the planning director or planning department to waive all these items, waive the hearing for these items.
Vice Chair Lynn, so the Hawaii revised statute says that the commission may delegate the authority to the department to waive a public hearing for certain variances. And so the commission may delegate these authorities, which are under 8-10, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's up to the commission to delegate it or not. You can keep that authority within the commission or delegate it to the department.
I'm sorry, the
Commissioner
Commissioner
Knowles?
Knowles, I just have then a follow-up. How I read this language is the commission hereby delegates to the department the authority to waive, so that by agreeing to this amendment as it currently stands, we are delegating it now. We're not deciding moment to moment or hearing to hearing when we want to delegate it. It's being delegated pursuant to the rules. Correct?
That's correct. So the commission can either delegate the authority to waive a variance for other structures or activity, or it can keep that authority within the commission. So that's the decision. Does that answer your question, Chair Lynn or Vice Chair?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And if I could,
Director
real
Kern?
quick, what might be easier is that when a suggestion is made, if somebody has an opposition to it, to bring it up, and that might save on time and efficiency. Assuming that we're not hearing any opposition or any further comments or remarks or adjustments, could take that as general concurrence to move forward with some type of amendment. Is that fair?
Yes, thank you. So moving forward, do we have some other points that we want to comment on or make a discussion? So when they go to revise this, that we're covering all the thoughts of all the commissioners. And it's okay to say something, Commissioner Fatuzek, if you have another thought.
Commissioner, Chair DeFranco, I just had a question.
Yes.
Commissioner Knowles with a question, or Vice Chair Knowles with a question. Assuming that we agree with some of these other definition changes or the expansion of the setback or those sorts of things, should we just not discuss those, or do we need to go through and say all the things we like, all the things we would like to change?
Again, this would be up to you folks. So my suggestion is that we pick out the things that there might be issue with or want to talk to. Again, this is really in alignment with Act 16. And also I wanted to clarify at the beginning that since Act 16 came into law, the planning department has been operating as that's in law, regardless whether these have been in effect. So the 40-foot shoreline setback's been in place, the SMA, all of that has been in place, and the department's been acting that way.
Thank you for the clarification.
A lot of these are just standard HRS updates, right? Or ask the commissioners if anyone else has any particular exceptions to any of them.
Yeah. I think it's being pointed out that if we have any more exceptions to anything, we should voice it. And if, because of the way that it's written, some of them involve the planning commission more than other things that are in here. Maybe the county, someone could speak to that to point out to us the ones that directly affect the planning commission.
Those would
Broad
be,
question,
my
sorry.
apologies. So I apologize because Act 16 did cover 3 rules. So I thought it was very important to include Planning Department Rule 11, which does have the substantial 40-foot setback. The Planning Commission today would be specifically looking at Rule 8 and 9 within the Planning Commission rules and the changes that are being made there. However, if you guys do have feedback for the Planning Department Rule 11, we are also gathering it today. Please also take in mind that like I mentioned with the next steps, we will be having another public meeting to address the planning department rule changes after we go through the planning commission rule changes.
So any other comments? I know one of the little buzz things that I've heard going on is, you know, the incorporation of the word development and who that is for and how much that will affect maybe a small homeowner that is now going to be considered a development. Is there any comments on this?
I can jump on that.
Yeah.
You were pretty much referring to the change in the SMA
Yeah.
element for the shoreline components.
Yes.
Yeah, so prior to this, the single family exemptions, single family residents were exempt up to 7,500 square feet, regardless of whether they were shoreline or not shoreline. And what this change has done is that if it's a shoreline property, there's no longer an exemption for single family residents, essentially. So if it exceeds $500,000 in value, it turns into an SMA major. If it's a project that's less than that, it would be an SMA minor. So for the small folks, the mom and pops,
Right.
it would still fall under, if it's less than 500,000, it would fall under an SMA minor category.
Commissioner Canoe, huh?
Isn't everything on the shoreline now SMA major, correct?
It is if it exceeds the $500,000 cost threshold, yes.
These days and times, majority is an SMA major.
Many, yes.
Yes, Commissioner
So
DeWitt.
with that, I know there's a concern, you know, just I'm looking at written testimony here. Just for the definition of development that was in there and a couple other things. Can you just kind of clarify on that? Yeah, not hear me? I'm loud, so I try not to speak so loudly into the mic.
Could you repeat that?
The only provision that this is just coming off of a testimony. And obviously we got to touch on all of that. But it was coming back, and obviously, like I just asked, anything over 500 is going to trigger an SMA major. Majority of shoreline property nowadays and anything going on is an SMA major, especially with costs moving forward. With that going forward, one question I want to ask you is what Mike brought up: Kuleana properties and Kuleana lands, especially to Native Hawaiians that say we come through and there's a tsunami or adverse effect onto the property, that they are able to go back and rebuild, and that have been there. Are there any, you know, are there any exemptions for that? Is there anything that's set in place in the language?
I don't believe there's anything explicitly exempt as it relates to Kuleanas and that side of it. There are some areas that would be defined as not as maybe development as far as like repair and maintenance goes.
Yeah.
Or minor activities. And outside of that, everything that's defined as development, which it now includes the single family residence on the shoreline would be under there. But I'm not aware of any other special provisions for
Okay.
those land types.
I think that language needs to, just coming in, I think that language needs to be changed as well, and there needs to be something put in there for special cases, and especially, you know, like you said, the mom and pop, the local families that are able to have property on the ocean, or are able to actually get to that point where they're able to buy a shoreline property and they're able to do something for their family and their kids. You know, even with family and friends helping you, still construction cost is gonna hit that SMA major, no matter which way you look at it.
I think we would need a legal opinion on whether or not we could adjust that down because that would be less stringent than what the state's requiring right
Yes.
now.
Yes. Yeah.
I
That's just-
couldn't
that-
opine on that.
There's a question that was on my mind and I've just been looking at it, so I wanted to bring it up and have a discussion about it.
Commissioner Duarte.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Kunuha. Commissioner Paisha Dewart here. I appreciate the questions that you raised, and I would like to also advocate that our staff would seek a legal opinion to find if there are any provisions, exceptions that can be made for Kuleana land owners in certain cases.
And so you'd be looking for some type of exemption that would not define it as development in that $500,000 threshold. So basically avoiding an SMA major. Is that what?
Director Kern, I'm more in the exploratory phase. I want to understand what are the various options. It might not be an exemption per se, but what are some of the options that we can look at?
You guys good on that? Okay.
You're good, Mike? You're good? Yes.
Staff can work with Corporation Counsel, Salas Ferguson, to explore what the options are related to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more points that we want to bring up or discuss? No, we're all good then? So we're gonna need a motion to continue. Is that right? Or a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion that we continue.
Can we just
Yep.
verify with staff on the most appropriate action here?
So we're required to provide 30 days minimum notice. So I think the earliest we would be able to schedule would be for June 2nd, after the Windward Planning Commission meeting. So that afternoon.
My suggestion, if we can, would be to the call of the chair to the call of the department, as we need to arrange both commissions in the timing factor. And we do have some work on the back end, and we do have a myriad of people taking vacations in this next month. So that would be the request, just to give us a little bit of flexibility on the exact date, but we'll get it back up as soon as possible.
Could I make a motion that we continue until the planning department can resubmit the requested amendments?
Language. Yes. Thank you.
I second the motion. This is Vice Chair Lynn.
Thank Vice Chair. Okay,
Can I say one thing? Is this appropriate time? I wanted Commissioner Kern, Commissioner Planning Director Kern, can you just reiterate that a lot of the things, this won't have any impact on planning moving forward with setbacks, et cetera, because the county is currently in compliance?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification opportunity to clarify again. Yes, since Act 16 came into law, the department has been acting as if these rules are already there, following exactly what Act 16 laid out in that legislation. So yes, this will not affect or disrupt that in any way. It'll just give us the time for us to work out these adjustments. Thank you.
Okay, with no further business, then we have a motion to adjourn. We have a second on the motion.
We need to vote.
Oh.
Any discussion?
I think we're voting. I'm hearing two different sides.
We have a motion to continue.
A motion to continue and a second. Is there any discussion? Okay. All right, so we have a motion on the table. Do we need to discuss anything about going forward then? The motion to continue. Is there any discussion from anybody or we? Seeing none, then we're going to call a vote then.
Perfect. Commissioner Matusek,
Aye.
Commissioner Lin,
Aye.
Commissioner Baylog,
Aye.
Commissioner Cross,
Aye.
Commissioner Daniele,
Aye.
Commissioner Deleuze,
Aye.
Commissioner Perrin,
Aye.
Commissioner Kanuha,
Aye.
Commissioner Knowles,
Aye.
Commissioner Paishan Duart,
Aye.
and Commissioner or Chair DeFranco.
Aye. All right, so the ayes have it.
The motion carries 11-0. Thank you.
Okay, and so now we're going to get a motion to adjourn, please.
I
Mike,
move to adjourn the joint meeting of the Windward and Leeward Planning Commission.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Kanuha. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye, any opposed? Okay, so the meeting is adjourned at 11:30. Motion carries, meeting adjourned.
Thank you, friends on Zoom. Aloha.
Aloha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you,
Beautiful day.
staff. Thank you, everyone.